It all started in 1694 with a broke king who needed a war. The system isn't broken, it was built this way. $315 trillion, that is the estimated total of all debt in the world. Let's try to comprehend that. If you earned $1 every single second, you would need to work for 10 million years to reach just 1 trillion. Now, multiply that by 315, it's a sum so vast it's no longer a number, it's a condition, an abstraction. It is not a debt to be paid. It is a weight to be carried, a shadow that touches every birth, every transaction, every aspiration. It's more money than has ever existed in physical form. It is a promise, a colossal, species-wide promise that humanity has collectively made to pay its own future. We're told this is normal. We're told this is growth. Nations borrow to build highways and hospitals. Corporations borrow to innovate and expand. Individuals borrow to buy a home, a car to live. Debt is the oxygen of our modern economy. But this pervasive, foundational truth raises a simple, terrifying question. If the entire world, every government, every company, every person is a debtor, who exactly is the creditor? Who owns this ledger? Who holds the master IOU for planet Earth? And what happens when they come to collect? We think of debt in personal terms. You borrow from a bank. The bank is the creditor, simple. But what about the biggest borrowers on the planet? Let's take the United States, the self-proclaimed leader of the free world, a nation with the most powerful military and the world's reserve currency. Their national debt is over $34 trillion, a stack of $1 bills that would reach the moon and back dozens of times. The political theater tells us this is a catastrophe. We are bankrupting our grandchildren. But the real story is stranger. The real question is, who do they owe? We are often told a convenient story. China owns the US debt. It's a geopolitical bogeyman. It's also mostly false. Foreign countries like Japan and China do hold a significant portion, around $8 trillion combined. They buy US bonds as a safe place to park their own money, but this is just a fraction of the total. So where is the rest? Here is the first plot twist in our story. The United States owes most of its money to itself. It's owed to its own pension funds, to US banks and insurance companies, to ordinary American citizens who buy savings bonds thinking it's a patriotic duty, and it's owed to its own government agencies. This is the accountant's trick. It's an IOU written from one government pocket to another. The largest of these is the Social Security Trust Fund. For decades, the US government collected more in Social Security taxes than it paid out. This surplus wasn't put in a vault. The government borrowed every single dime of it to spend on wars, roads, and other programs. In its place, it left a stack of special, non-tradable bonds. Promises. To pay back those promises, the government must now tax new citizens. It's a promise from the future to pay for the past. But the most peculiar creditor, the most mysterious, is the one at the very center, the Federal Reserve. The Fed, listen to the name. Federal implies government. Reserve implies a vault of savings. It is neither. The Fed isn't a government department like the Treasury. It is a private-public hybrid, a bank for banks, created by bankers for bankers in 1913. It operates with political independence. When the US government needs money it doesn't have, and it never has it, it doesn't ask the Fed for a loan. Instead, the Treasury issues a bond, a beautiful piece of paper, a fancy IOU. The Federal Reserve then buys this bond. But where does the Fed get the money to buy this multi-trillion-dollar IOU? It creates it from nothing. With a few keystrokes, the Fed conjures digital dollars into existence and swaps them for the government's bond. This is not a loan from existing savings. It is the act of creation. This is the genie. The US, like most modern nations, doesn't just borrow money. It borrows money into existence. The Fed gets a debt-free asset, the bond, which pays interest. The government gets cash to spend. This isn't a secret conspiracy. It's the design. It's called monetizing the debt. The debt is the money. And if you think the US is an extreme example, look east. Japan. A nation famous for its savers and its efficiency, Japan's national debt is quadrillions of yen. It's over 260% of their entire economic output. By any traditional measure, Japan should have collapsed decades ago. So who owns Japan's impossible mountain of debt? You guessed it, the Bank of Japan, their own central bank. The Bank of Japan now owns over half of all Japanese government bonds. It is not just the lender of last resort, it is the only resort. And this isn't just an American or Japanese story. Look at Europe, the European Central Bank, the ECB. During its quantitative easing programs, it bought the debt of Germany, France, Italy, and Spain to hold the Eurozone together. It bought so much, It became the largest single creditor to the governments of Europe. This is the modern paradox. The biggest borrowers in the world are in debt to themselves. It is a closed loop, a self-referential system where debt is created by the same entities who buy the debt. So how did we build this impossible machine? How did we get here? How did we build a world where money is debt? The story does not begin with a computer. It begins with kings and their wars. But even before the kings, it begins with faith. Perhaps the first true international bankers were the Knights Templar. In the 12th century, they created a system to protect pilgrims. A pilgrim in London could deposit his gold, receive a coded piece of parchment, and travel to Jerusalem, where he could redeem that parchment for his gold. They had invented the first check. They were a bank built on trust, and they became fabulously wealthy. And they learned the first lesson of banking. You can lend out the gold that's just sitting in your vault. They also learned the first lesson of lending to kings. In 1307, King Philip IV of France, who was deeply in debt to the Templars, simply had them all arrested, tortured, and burned at the stake. He erased his debt. For centuries, this was the norm. In the 16th century, King Philip II of Spain was the most powerful man in the world. He commanded an empire on which the sun never set. He was also a serial debtor. He borrowed staggering sums from the bankers of Genoa and Augsburg to fund his endless wars. But the gold from the New World wasn't enough. In 1557, Philip just defaulted. He declared a jubilee, a royal bankruptcy. He simply refused to pay. The result, catastrophe. The great banking houses of Europe collapsed. The German Fugger family, the richest on earth, was ruined. The lesson was learned. Lending to a king was too dangerous. A king's promise was worthless. A new system was needed. The answer came in 1694 in England. King William III was broke. He desperately needed money to fight a war against France. But after Philip, no banker would lend to him personally. A Scotsman, a financier named William Paterson, had a radical, brilliant idea. He and his partners would not lend to the king. They would lend to the nation, to England. They would create a private bank, the Bank of England. This bank would loan the king £1.2 million, money they didn't have. In exchange, the bank received a royal charter. This charter granted them the exclusive right to issue banknotes backed not by gold, but by the nation's promise to pay. It was financial alchemy. The bank didn't loan the king gold, it loaned him credit. And that credit, those pieces of paper, became the nation's money. The government got its war funds. The bank got interest forever. For the first time, a nation's money supply was not tied to a tangible asset, but to a government's debt. The debt was perpetual. It was never meant to be repaid. Only the interest. This model, this genie, was too powerful to remain in one bottle. It crossed the Atlantic. In 1910, a secret meeting was held on a private island off the coast of Georgia, Jekyll Island. In attendance were the titans of finance, representatives of the Morgan, Rockefeller, and Warburg banking dynasties. They met under the guise of a duck hunt. Their goal: to draft a new central banking law for America, one that they would control. They succeeded. In 1913, their plan was passed as the Federal Reserve Act. The Bank of England model was now powering the world's rising economic star. But there was still one limitation, a safety chain on the genie: gold. For decades, the US dollar was as good as gold. Under the Bretton Woods system, established in 1944, the world's currencies were pegged to the dollar, and the dollar was pegged to gold at $35 an ounce. Other countries held dollars because they trusted that America would, if asked, exchange those dollars for physical gold. This was the exorbitant privilege. America could print paper and buy real goods from the world. But the 1960s came. The US was spending vast sums on the Vietnam War and the Great Society programs. It was printing far more dollars than it had gold to back. Other countries, led by the astute Charles de Gaulle of France, grew suspicious. De Gaulle famously called out the exorbitant privilege and called America's bluff. He sent the French Navy, not with guns but with dollars, to New York Harbor, demanding gold in return. Other nations followed. It was a run on the bank. The vault at Fort Knox was emptying. On a Sunday night in 1971, President Nixon went on television and made an announcement that changed the world forever. I have directed Secretary Connolly to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold. Temporarily. That temporary suspension is now over 50 years old. That night, the entire planet was unplugged. The final link between money and anything real was severed. From that moment on, all money, everywhere, became fiat money. Money backed by nothing but government decree and debt. But this created a new, terrifying problem. If the dollar was backed by nothing, why would anyone want it? Why would it remain the world's reserve currency? The genie was out of the bottle, but it needed a new source of power. The answer came in 1973. A deal was struck. The US offered military protection to Saudi Arabia. In return, Saudi Arabia and all of OPEC would agree to sell their oil only in US dollars. This was the masterstroke. The Petrodollar system was born. The dollar was no longer backed by gold. It was backed by oil. Every country that needed to buy oil now had to acquire US dollars first. To get those dollars, they had to sell their goods to America. The genie was free, and it was hungry. And now the entire world was forced to feed it. So, we return to our question. If the US owes itself, if Japan owes itself, who is the invisible creditor? The creditor is not a person. It's not a secret cabal in a dark room. The creditor is the system itself. For developing nations, the creditors are often visible. The World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, IMF. They are the system's enforcers. They offer loans to struggling countries, but these loans come with these conditions. Structural adjustment programs. Remember the Asian financial crisis of 1997? Countries like South Korea, Thailand, and Indonesia were booming. They were called the Asian Tigers. Then foreign capital suddenly fled. Their currencies collapsed. The IMF arrived as the savior. It offered billions in bailout loans. The price? Sovereignty. The IMF demanded structural adjustments. Mass privatization of public assets like water and electricity sold for pennies on the dollar to foreign corporations. Slashed budgets for education and healthcare. It sold as financial discipline. Critics call it economic colonialism. The country gives up its future for the price of the loan. But for the developed world, the creditors are far more subtle. They don't need to enforce. We do it to ourselves. Who holds the trillions in US, European, and Japanese bonds? The debt is managed by the largest financial entities the world has ever known, asset managers, BlackRock, Vanguard. These two firms alone manage assets worth more than the entire economies of Japan and Germany combined, over $20 trillion. They don't own the debt in the way a king owns land. They manage it. They are the high priests of the ledger. But how did these two firms become the high priests? The answer, ironically, lies in the last great crisis, 2008. The 2008 crash was a crisis of active management. It was a crisis of Wall Street geniuses gambling with our money. The system broke. When the US government needed to manage the toxic mortgage assets from the bailout, who did they call? They called BlackRock. And in the decade that followed, the public, disillusioned with active managers, fled to passive investing. They poured trillions into ETFs, exchange-traded funds. And who are the largest providers of these ETFs? BlackRock and Vanguard. This is the final brilliant trap. We are the creditors. You, the saver. You, the pensioner. Anyone hoping to build a small nest egg. You're told to be a responsible investor, to put your money in a diversified 401k or IRA. That diversified fund automatically, passively, buys the debt. It buys US Treasury bonds. It buys corporate bonds. We buy into the system because we want our savings to grow, and the system grows our savings by lending them out to governments who are borrowing and to pay the interest on the debt they already owe. It is a serpent eating its own tail. We are financing our own prison. We are the inmates and also the guards. But this perpetual motion machine has a cost, a hidden tax. If new money is constantly created as debt by a central bank's keystroke, What happens to the value of the money already in your pocket? It goes down. That is inflation. It is the genie's price. It is the silent, invisible transfer of wealth from the saver to the debtor. And the biggest debtor is the government. But this system has another, more subtle, corrosive effect. The Cantillon Effect, named after an 18th century economist, Richard Cantillon. He observed that when the king creates new money, it does not spread evenly. Who gets it first? Not you. It goes to the government. It goes to the large banks. It goes to the corporations who receive the government contracts. They get to spend this new money before prices have risen. They buy real assets, land, stocks, art. By the time that money filters down to the average person in the form of a salary, the prices of houses, cars, and food have already gone up. Inflation is not just a hidden tax. It is a mechanism for increasing inequality. It rewards the debtor and punishes the saver. It benefits those closest to the genie and hollows out the middle class. And if the genie is let out too fast, the system breaks. In 1920s Germany, the government, desperate to pay its war reparations, turned to the printing press. At first, it seemed to work. Unemployment fell. Exports boomed. Then the genie went feral. Prices doubled, then tripled, then quadrupled, every day. A loaf of bread cost 1 billion marks. A lifetime of savings turned to dust in a matter of weeks. A woman's fur coat left on the street was stolen, but the thief left the pile of billion-mark notes that were in her pocket. The money was worthless. This is the end game. This is hyperinflation. It is the death of money when the collapse of a society. We are told, don't worry, that can't happen here. Our leaders are in control. But the debt ceiling debates you see on the news, it's theatre. It is not a ceiling. It is a stage. They will raise the ceiling. They have to. The system must expand. It requires constant growth. Because if the borrowing stops, the interest cannot be paid. If the interest cannot be paid, the bonds default. If the bonds default, the pension funds collapse. If the funds collapse, the system dies. They are not arguing about if they should pay the bill. They are arguing about whose credit card to use next. We are not citizens of nations anymore. We are residents of a balance sheet. We are ruled, not by kings or presidents, but by the ledger, by the relentless compounding math of interest, the $315 trillion debt. It will never be paid back. It's not designed to be paid back. It is designed to be managed. The invisible creditor isn't a shadowy figure. It is the prison we have built for ourselves. A prison where the bars are made of our own retirement savings, and the guards are the central bankers who hold the keys to the printing press. A prison made of promises we can't keep, owed to a future we have already sold. The only question left is, when does the ledger demand balance? Thank you so much for watching. We know this was a deep dive and we're grateful you joined us on the journey. Follow us and don't forget to subscribe. We look forward to your suggestions and requests in the comments. Let us know what hidden stories you want us to uncover next.